Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining me. And Brandon, Mike, thank you so much. It's good to be with you again. Hello, everyone. It is Thursday, October 8th, in what is the longest year in any of our lives. But I'm glad to be with you for a few minutes here this morning. So let's get started because this involves you. I need you in the chat. So let me know in the chat right now. Let's test your fingers. Let's test the device. Where are you joining me from this morning? Like, where are you at? You can say what city you're in. You can say you're at home. You can say you're at work. Let's see what people are doing and where they are at right now. So go ahead and add it in the chat and we'll take a look. El Dorado, Kansas, Wichita, Kansas, Andover, Kansas. I'm sensing a trend. Jayhawk Nation. You know what, Mike, come back here for a second. Mike, unmute yourself. Is Kansas itself, can I call it the Jayhawk state, or is that isolated to the University of Kansas?
You know, that's University of Kansas. Brandon and myself don't hold it against us, but we bleed purple. We're K-Staters. We've got Wichita State here as well, and I see WSU just popped up on the screen. But KU's a big one, especially when it comes to basketball season, along with Wichita State for sure.
Well, apologies for my faux pas. Let's move on so I stop embarrassing myself. Hey, everybody. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what's happened in the last 6 or 7 months. We're going to talk about what could potentially happen in the next few months, both in regards to the market, the stock market, and the economy at large. Also, we are going to set some financial goals. Here's the reality. You never would have registered for this event had I told you I was going to have you set financial goals. So I'm already being deceptive, right? I'm tricking you. Just wait until some of these other reveals I have for you in our time here together. And you will quickly realize why that was not in the marketing material. At any point in time, you can hit me in the chat box with a question and I will provide the answer. The truth of the matter, though, is there are some real pros in the house today, and that is Mike and Brandon. So in a few minutes, I will bring them back, and you know, we'll just see what some of the trends are right now with people in their financial lives from an investment perspective and a technical financial planning perspective. Before we get there, though, you and I have some ground to cover. So I've been doing this for about 20 years, but here's something I have to remind myself of on a pretty regular basis, and that's that the market, the stock market, and the economy are not the same thing. Unfortunately, many people use those two terms or concepts interchangeably. And you really shouldn't do that because it can add a lot of unwanted and unneeded stress to a situation. Here's what I mean by that. So at the beginning of this year, March or January and February, I almost began the year with March. That's how you know how long of a year it's been. I've just switched the order of the months. But January and February, things were relatively fine in both the economy and the market. And then come March, all heck broke loose, right? So you have February 19th was an all-time high with the S&P 500, hit an all-time high. And by March 23rd, it had fallen more than 34%. The market fell 34% in just over a month. Now, you hear some terms about when the market goes down, and it's important to understand what they mean and what happens after a market goes down. You hear the term crash, but that's not technically something. But there are two terms that indicate the market's gone down that are worth knowing. One's called a correction, which I agree is actually pretty silly. It doesn't seem anything too correct about the market going down. Alas, the market going down is called a correction. And when the market goes down between 10 to 20% from its high, again, it's called a correction. And typically, there's been, 26 corrections, 26 market corrections since World War II. And it takes, on average, 4 months for the market to recover from that correction back up to the pre-fall high. 4 months. Well, you heard me say earlier, we did not fall between 10 to 20% from February 19th to March 23rd. We fell 34%, which puts it in bear market territory. We actually entered into a bear market. Now, a bear actually sounds a little bit scarier than a correction, and it is. The market fell 34%, and typically when we enter into a bear market, it takes about 4.2 years to recover from that bear market. Guess how long it took this time? 148 days. I'm not going to say I'm bad at math, but I will tell you this. You don't have to be good or bad at math to know that 148 days is better than 4.2 years. I'm telling you this not because I'm trying to be dismissive of the volatility of the stock market, but more importantly, because you and I right now, you and I have a lot to be worried about. Like there's so many things going through our mind on a daily basis. How do we homeschool our kids? What's going to happen in the election? What's going to happen to the economy? What's going to happen to civility in our world? These are some pretty big concerns. And I'm not, again, being dismissive of your concerns of the market's volatility, but the market has proven over the last 6 or 7 months, it's going to be fine. Is it going to go up and down violently? Probably. It always kind of does. But if you have a long-term approach and you've talked about your time horizon and your risk tolerance with Mike and Brandon, then you can rest assured that that's one of those things you just really shouldn't worry too much about. In fact, here's what ended up happening for a lot of people. Actually, Brandon, open your mic up here for a second. I'm curious. I don't know why I keep doing this. But Brandon, so sure. A lot of people refuse to open their first quarter statements, right? You know, the quarter ended and people are like, I can't even look. But then what they did is they opened their second quarter statement, and guess what they saw? Tell us what they saw when they opened that second quarter statement.
I think there was a lot of shock and awe. You know, you hear so much in the press, it's like the world is falling, but then you definitely see that coming right back in June. So it definitely alleviated a lot of those stresses that so many individuals did feel.
Absolutely. So that's the thing. It's like, it's really easy and very common to be worried about the market, but we have bigger fish to fry. In fact, the economy itself is still terrifying. We're in a recession. We've been in a recession since February of 2020. The average recession in our country is 11 months long. I'll do the math. That means we would be out of the recession by the end of this year if this were a normal recession. This is not a normal recession. There's just no way. The economy was shut off like a light switch in March and April, and we've had trouble turning it back on. The Great Recession, which was from December of 2007 to 2009, was 17 months long. A lot of us remember that feeling and what was going on, and this clearly feels different. It clearly is different. I have a hard time believing our economy is back to normal to start 2021. So we're in completely different places between those two things. Number one, the market, there's nothing you really can do about it except be allocated appropriately by working with Mike and Brandon and their team to figure out how you should be invested. That's all you can do. You can't do anything about our national economy. All you can do is deal with your personal economy. And that's where the rest of my attention is going to be dedicated to this afternoon, this morning, depending on where you are. That's what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how can you prepare your financial life appropriately for whatever in the world is next. And a big part of that is understanding the emotions and the feelings you will have revolving around your money, right? I think of financial behavior more akin to how you deal with nutrition and fitness than you do math. I think the decisions you make on a daily basis, it's like, should I have a Caesar salad with grilled chicken or should I have a triple cheeseburger with bacon, right? That's how I think of the financial decisions we make on a regular basis. Because if you seek the grilled chicken Caesar salad, you are in fact seeking satisfaction and not necessarily pleasure. No offense, grilled chicken Caesar salad. If you're going for the triple cheeseburger with bacon, that is a pleasure decision, and there is a lot less satisfaction when that meal is done. We make the same decisions on a daily basis in our financial life, and understanding how our emotions shift goes a long way in preventing mistakes. So I'm going to share something with you. We call it the emotional roller coaster. This is how we feel in any given moment in our financial lives, in good times and in bad, right? So what we're going to do at first is we're going to assign a calendar to this thing. If you start on the left side of the screen at Optimism, let's call this January 2nd of 2020. And I will speak for myself and you can go whatever direction you want with it. January 2nd of 2020, I was feeling optimistic about the year. Felt good about the market, felt good about business, felt good about the economy. Things were going pretty well. Well, a couple weeks into January of 2020, I was proven right. I felt validated. I started to feel excited and even thrilled about how things were going. Even euphoric as February 19th hit and the market hit all-time highs. That's a good thing. That's a good thing for our economy and for our market at large when the market goes up. Well, late February came and anxiety set in as we started hearing about a virus and it's coming to shore here in the United States. And then by March 12th and 13th, denial had most definitely set in my life. And then on March 16th, which is a Monday, I live in central Indiana. And let me tell you, that morning when we woke up on March 16th, it was the thickest fog I had ever seen. It was like Steven Spielberg was in charge of the weather that day to set the tone on what was one of the weirdest days in American history. So fear, desperation, and panic were all part of my life prior to my bowl of oatmeal that morning. Then you move into capitulation, which of course is just a fancy word for giving up, despondency, depression. I mean that from the sense of a deep sadness, not a clinical depression, respectfully. Then on to hope, relief, and optimism. I don't particularly care where you are on this chart, but it's important for you to know that you are on this chart, and you are always on this chart. Pick your best financial time in your life. You're on this chart. Pick 5 years from now. You're somewhere on this chart. And what you need to understand is that the point of maximum risk is currently behind us, because no one's feeling euphoric right now, right? I mean, no one's really feeling euphoric. Our biggest risk to our financial lives was in February. It is not now. You are likely closer to maximum opportunity for your personal finances than you are at maximum risk. But to leverage those feelings in the appropriate way, you have to understand that if any time in your financial life you're willing to accept help, it better be now. I mean, it just better be now. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say collectively, as a group, this is the worst economy any of us have seen in roughly 100 years. And now, I've not been around for all 100 of those years, but I just know with unemployment, with GDP contraction, and some other economic indicators that we're in a pretty rough spot. Fortunately, there are still stimulus plans that are still in effect from earlier this year. There potentially could be stimulus going forward. But more important than anything else, there are some provisions that are available to you right now that you honestly should take a real good look at. Not only should you get the opinion and guidance of a guy like Mike or Brandon to inform what's going on in your financial life, but then you look at more government programs, such as if you happen to have an FHA mortgage and you're really struggling, you can seek forbearance for 6 months, 180 days. And then at the end of that time frame, you could do it again. And that's part of the CARES Act. If you have a federally backed student loan right now, it's at a 0% interest rate through the end of the year because President Trump issued an executive order in early August that extended the CARES Act provision. Long story short, if you don't have the level of stability you want right now, you should not be making student loan payments, federal student loan payments, that is, because they're at a 0% rate and you don't have to make a payment through the end of the year. Instead, you should take the money that you typically allocate towards that payment every month and use it to build a stronger cash position. The fact of the matter is this: there are now 3 groups of Americans. 3 groups of Americans on this call, 3 groups of Americans in my neighborhood, in every office building in America. Here's where we're at. There are people who have been greatly financially impacted by what's gone on this year. That's about 25 to 30% of people. And it's not necessarily you directly, right? It could be a significant other who you share finances with. Maybe they've lost income or hours, right? But if you've lost 25% or more of your household monthly income in the last 7 months or so, then you're in group 1. And again, that's about 25 to 30% of people. Group 2 are people who have not been greatly financially impacted by what's happened. However, they don't have a lot of stability, right? They don't have objective financial stability, which we'll talk a little bit about. That's 60 to 65% of people. So again, I'll do the math for you. I'm making it easy for you this morning. That's 90% of Americans are in those first 2 groups. The third group are people who've not been greatly impacted at all by what's gone on, and they have a lot of stability. So if things keep getting weird, they'll likely be fine. So let's talk about this second group. Let's talk about the biggest group in the middle. If you're in this group, which statistically you're likely to be in this group, our goal, your goal, can I just assign a goal to you? This is what I want. You're in a race to get to group 3 before you end up in group 1. And that's not to scare you. That's just to say, look, if this economy continues to drag out this way, airlines just 8 days ago laid off tens of thousands of people. 9 days ago, the happiest place on earth, Disney, laid off 28,000 people. And so if this economy doesn't turn, It's the people that are in group 2 that will find themselves in group 1 unless they sure themselves up by getting to group 3. This concept I'm talking about is the concept of stability. Now, the challenge with stability is that many of us, your host included, have mistaken comfort in lifestyle for stability in the past. Okay, so here's what I mean. Let's say it's 2 years ago. Nothing bad's really going on, right? I mean, for some people, you know what I mean? 2 years ago, there's no pandemic, there's no recession. I see you on the street. How's it going? You're like, hey, things are pretty good. But are they? Are you stable financially, which would mean 3 months expenses set aside, no credit card debt, your mortgage or rent payments not too high of a percentage of your household income, your total income is relatively fixed as opposed to variable, some other elements there as well. Is that your reality? Or do you just have no problem affording your mortgage? Your car payment doesn't bother you. You get to go on vacations every once in a while. You really can go out to eat more or less whenever you want. So things are really comfortable. I would argue, probably with data if we had time, that most Americans who are in that middle group are there because they've mistaken the comfort and ease of which their life goes on for stability. They say, oh, I'm stable. No, you're not. You're actually just comfortable. That's not an accusation. It's not even a judgment, because I've been there. I mean, I've been to a point where it's like, things are going really well. And you realize that when opportunity, economic opportunity is coming your way, you use that money to make today easier as opposed to make tomorrow easier. And that's the shift that has to occur for most people. Now, here's the good news. Over the last 7 months or so, this shift has already started to occur. Most people have changed their spending on a monthly basis by at least $250, sometimes up to $750 a month for a number of different reasons. Number one, early on in this thing, when the economy was shut off, you couldn't buy anything. I mean, you certainly couldn't find flour and yeast or toilet paper in the store. You couldn't buy anything. You were trying to order carry out, a lot of Amazon packages delivering, but our spending just totally shifted and blew up from March to April. On top of that, people began to have changes in income. So from a pragmatic standpoint, they just changed their spending. And for some people, that spending change has hung on. Here's what I encourage you to do, and we're going to talk about this more here in a little bit. Look at your January bank statement. Look at how much you spent on whatever in January. Then look at your April bank statement and see how your spending has changed. Then look at your September bank statement to see which changes of habit have stuck. I would argue if you're in group 1, like we talked about earlier, group 1, people who've been greatly impacted, most of those changes have probably stuck in a good way. If you're in group 2, it's quite possible that in order to feel better about what's going on, you ran towards comfort as opposed to stability. So you tried to get your spending back up to normal levels. And if you're in group 3, whether you like it or not, it's probably just business as usual, right? The second opportunity in front of us here right now is the ability to press reset on our financial lives. You ever wake up one day and you're just starting thinking through your existence and your life and everything around you, and you're like, man, I would change some things. I mean, not like your marriage or something like that. That's a little much. But things like, man, we got a lot of obligations, right? Maybe we wouldn't have bought this house. Maybe we wouldn't have made that car lease decision. Things like that. I had a buddy 6-7 years ago, good friend, doing pretty well in his career. And he and his wife wanted to buy a dream house. Anytime you say dream house, you know you're heading for a rough situation. They bought their dream house in this historic neighborhood in central Indiana, and it was a beautiful house. It was like 100 years old. Well, guess what? That house nearly killed them, figuratively speaking. Financially, they could barely afford it. It constantly needed maintenance and repair. And as they kept looking at this house as we need to make this work, it made their life worse and worse and worse and worse until about 5 years into it, they finally said, this house is killing us. So they sold the house. They pressed reset on what they viewed to be the most important thing in their life. Their financial life changed forever. Their jobs got better. They stopped having IRS problems because they were struggling so much with that particular house. It's okay to press reset. And if you looked at that emotions chart for earlier, the best time to actually press reset on your finances is arguably right now. Right? Yeah. Is it hard? Yes, it's hard. Yes. And I'm not saying that everyone can do it, but if you have the opportunity to make some systemic changes in your life, absolutely do it. And finally, my goal for you is to stop guessing. If you're stressed about any area of your life, and I'll give you some examples, right? If you're stressed about a relationship, are you likely to constantly want to talk to that person? Probably not. You're going to bury your head. If you're stressed about your fitness, you probably don't work out a lot. If you're stressed about your nutrition, you probably don't eat well. If you're stressed about your money, you probably don't really know your numbers, right? So that is to say, if you're ready to make some changes, if you want to create more stability in your financial life, you can't just guess how much debt you have. You can't guess what your monthly income is. You can't guess what your savings account balance is. You got to know. That's really important. I did just get a question come in, so let's go ahead and hit it. Do you think right now is the right time to buy a house or a good time to sell? Let's tackle those independently. Thanks for that question. So I have to admit, whereas home ownership is someone's American dream, I don't actually view it to be the American dream. I think that idea got conflated with home ownership programs through the government. I think it started to turn into a marketing message. I will say this though. If you can afford to own a home, meaning you can afford to fix the home when it breaks, that's my standard. If something breaks in the house, something big, $3,000 to $6,000, if you can afford that expense, then you can afford to own a home. If you cannot afford to own a home under that standard, just rent, make it someone else's problem. Is right now a good time to buy a house? If you've got stability in your employment, in your income, you have an emergency fund on top of the down payment, and you can afford the monthly payment, yes, now is a beautiful time to buy a home. It is the ideal time to buy a home for renters who have been preparing themselves for this very moment. For others who have to sell a home they already have to buy another home, it's a little more complicated, right? Because whereas they will benefit from the increased housing prices to sell their current home, they don't benefit from the increased prices as a buyer of the new home. On top of that, sometimes increasing your lifestyle expenses in a period of time like this, again, doesn't lead to stability. You're simply increasing your lifestyle. So we are seeing a lot of that right now. People looking for comfort, and instead of getting that comfort by saving more money or creating more stability, they're choosing to get that comfort by buying their dream house or expanding their house. And again, this is not judgmental. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. But just understand it does eventually affect your stability. Okay, I did tell you I had a few more reveals for you here today. We're going to talk about budgeting, but we're going to talk about it in a way I promise you've never heard it discussed. We're not really going to get into numbers. We're going to talk theory. So we're talking a little bit about budgeting. We're going to talk a little bit about credit in a different way than you think. Then we're going to bring the guys back, Mike and Brandon, to talk more about stabilizing your finances and what you need to know right now from the market perspective going into the end of the year. All right. I get another question. How much do you recommend to put down on a house? That's an excellent question. So technically, you should put down 20%. However, I don't find that very realistic. I think if you can afford to put down 10% and then creatively finance the rest so you can avoid things like private mortgage insurance, 10% is the threshold in my estimation, and here's why. Not only does it prove that you have the ability to accumulate money, which is a valuable skill when you're a homeowner, but that 10% can't also be your emergency fund. I'm going to make up a big number here. No one freak out. Let's say I want to buy a $250,000 house. That would mean I would need a $25,000 down payment, and I would still need an emergency fund on top of that to do it safely. That was about to sound a little much. I was about to say, this is my expert opinion. It really is. Typically though, when you're in the home buying process, you're getting advice from the lender who wants to loan you as much money as possible right prior to you defaulting, or a realtor whose job is to drive the price of a home higher because they're incentivized to do so. I'm not saying that in a rude way about realtors or lenders, but it is actually true. Your idea here with housing is not to handcuff yourself to that house for the rest of your life. So that is the answer, 10%. All right, so let's do this. Please understand, back in 2009, during the last recession we dealt with, I was doing a news program for CBS News across the country, and we followed with cameras. This sounds creepy, but stay with me. We followed 3 families around for 9 weeks during the recovery. It was something like March 9th, and then for the next 63 days beyond that. And so we followed them around just to try to change their financial structure. And so we did a bunch of research around this project, and we found that the average American household was spending money about 22 times per week. Average American household in 2009 was spending money about 22 times per week. This is not utility payments and stuff, y'all. This is going to the grocery store, going out to eat, it's time to get some gas, going to CVS or Walgreens, going to the liquor store, whatever. 22 times per week per household. And what we learned beyond that was the more times a person spent money, the less they cared what they were buying costs. Because what was actually happening is there was a shift in consumer behavior. Our relationship with convenience got out of hand. Okay, there's a few different things to learn here. So let's start with the technical sense. Number one, I urge you to go to your January bank statement. Count how many times you spent money for the entire month of January. Again, these are consumer discretionary transactions, not things like car payments, no rent or mortgage payments, no utility payments. These are like in the moment, you're at a store, swipe, you spent, or Amazon. Not that there was Amazon in 2009, but you get my point, right? Add all those transactions up, then divide by 4.33, because there are 4.33 weeks in a month. And that will tell you how many transactions you had per week in January of 2020. Ideally, it's somewhere between 10 to 14. If you're at 22 or above, that's a problem. And I'll tell you why in a second. Then I want you to go to April's bank statement, and I want you to do the exact same exercise. And then I want you to go to September's bank statement, and I want you to do the same exercise. I want you to see how your spending habits changed. Because when our backs were against the wall this spring, a lot of us made really wise, prudent financial decisions to change behavior. The real question is, how many of those changes stuck? Now, here's why this is important, because it is actually important. I find most people misuse the concept of convenience. For me, convenience, defined in a financial sense, is when you exchange money for time. I'm going to spend money to save time, and that is called convenience. Here's an example. So tonight, my son has soccer practice and my daughter has soccer practice on different sides of town. So my wife and I are mom and dad taxiing it tonight, right? So if we didn't plan ahead, if we didn't invest time ahead, we would likely be forced to get carry out on the way home, grab a pizza or something like that. Because again, spending money to save time. However, if we planned ahead, got the crock pot out or whatever, because we're getting home at different times, we're investing time to save money. I find if you have a tremendous number of transactions over the course of a week, oftentimes it's you spending money to save time when you really shouldn't. Let's go back to those 3 groups. I just held up 4 fingers. Anybody else see that? Let's go back to those 3 groups, and I held up 4 fingers. Don't trust a word I say. Let's go back to those 3 groups. The first group are people who have been greatly impacted by what's gone on so far in our economy this year. Should that group spend money to save time? Probably not. Probably not. In fact, I would argue they likely have more time than money. Group 2, these are people who've not been impacted yet, but don't have a lot of stability. If they don't have a lot of stability, do they also likely have more time than money? Yes. But this group of people who's in group 2, who often mistakes comfort for stability, often uses convenience as a tool to spend more money to save time, and that's why they're comfortable. Group 3, arguably, is the one group that is the most justified spending time to save money. Now, I'm not so tedious as to suggest if you're in group 1 or 2, you should never have a meal out or go buy something. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying from a 30,000 foot view, looking down on this thing, when you look at how frequently you spend money, you have to ask yourself, how much of this is just an attempt to make my life more convenient? And The operative question here, can I really afford to do that? Now, beyond that, budgeting takes on a completely different spin that you have to understand in order to be a fully functioning entity. I don't know if you know what that phrase means, if I'm being honest with you. All right, so we're going to talk about awareness, we're going to talk about communication, and we are going to talk about accountability. Let's begin with awareness. If I were able to convince you to budget, it's likely that I'd be able to convince you to budget because you value the concept of awareness, right? That is to say, you'd like to know what's going on. And you're like, okay, I'd like to know what's going on. I'm going to budget, Pete. However, we tend to make a really weird decision once we've come to that point because of online banking. We can be aware of what's in our checking account at any moment. Like it would take me 15 seconds to get my checking account balance on my phone right now, right? Same for you. So let's say I look and I get my balance right now. It is 11:35 local time where I'm at. I know my balance. Let's say tomorrow, the same time, 24 hours from now, I think, okay, well, we went out to eat last night. We had some Amazon transactions. My wife's spent some money on some things. I actually don't know how much money we have right now. And it's just 24 hours later. So I'm going to look again. So you went from being aware to unaware. And the only way you think you're aware again is because you look again. And I know that sounds wild here, but here's the bigger point. If you're constantly checking your checking account balance, it means you're unaware of what's actually going on because you spend money so frequently, or the other member of your household theoretically spends money so frequently that you can't keep track of it all. Here's how I know this is true, by the way. Do you know that little game that you and I both play when we check our balance online or on our phones? You know the game. You put in your user ID, you put in your password, then you hit submit, and you know your balance is about to show up. So you guess what you think your balance should be, right? You're like, all right, if there's $600 in there, I'm not going to be worried. And then it pops up and it's $780, right? It's not $600, it's $780. And you have this little celebration in your mind. You go, I don't need Pete the planner. I got more money than I thought. No. You have the exact amount of money you should have. You just had no idea what was going on. Like when you're surprised at how much money you have, that is not a victory. It is a loss because you don't know. And here's the worst part. So right now you check it, you think there's going to be 600, but there's 780. So for the next couple days, you will spend your balance down to what you thought should have been there because you think you found money, right? You'll go out to eat and maybe you'll get a second cocktail, or you'll get an appetizer and dessert because you're fancy, you got extra money. Or maybe you stop off to grab a bottle of wine to take to a socially distanced dinner party, and instead of spending $17 on a bottle of Chardonnay, which is your jam, maybe you spend $26 because, well, hey, I got an extra $180 in my account. That's what happens. So it's this lack of awareness, and then how we try to find that awareness by using online banking that actually becomes the challenge. You're not going to like my solution. I might as well just tell you that now, but it works. The less you look at your balance, the more likely you are to be aware. Why? Well, if you don't look at your balance, you still have to know what your balance is, so you had to keep track of it. Think of the 1980s when people just had check registers and people weren't using debit cards. Everyone knew their balance in their checking account and no one had online access to it. And it's not like every day you opened your check register just to see what was in there. You just knew. We've become so blissfully unaware because we leverage the convenience of online banking that it's a detriment to our financial lives. Now, this next point is interesting, but it's also, you're about to take relationship advice from a guy that looks like me, which is not ideal, right? So here's the thing. If you have a spontaneous money conversation with your significant other, it generally won't end well. Because if someone's not in the mood to talk about money or stressed about money, how does that go? It doesn't go well. I'll tell you this, I talk about money all day long, it's a job. And when my wife and I have an unplanned financial conversation, I hate it. I hate it, right? Because I'm just not ready to talk about it. I want to get my mind right. So tonight, when you go home, don't be like, oh, honey, this really handsome guy on the internet was telling us that we should do this or that. Don't do that to them. Don't put them in that position. You can go home and say, hey, Mike and Brandon hosted this event. Learned a couple things this weekend, Saturday or Sunday. Can we take 20 minutes, 30 minutes and just go over a few things I learned? Yeah, okay, sure, that works. Let them get their head around it. Most times when couples struggle to communicate about money, it's because there's not a planned moment, planned event to talk about that money. So you're constantly reacting to each other. It should be a more proactive approach. I happen to like to have a financial conversation once a month in our household, and we tend to limit it to that. And once you get in that pattern, you really don't need to talk about money more than that. Now, the third aspect of accountability, right before I bring Mike and Brandon back, and we'll talk a little bit what sort of trends going on in people's financial lives right now. The third aspect of budgeting is accountability. And yes, I mean accountability to your significant other, but more importantly, what I mean is using your budget to hold yourself accountable to your financial goals. I told you there'd be goal setting. Okay. I think a lot of people struggle because they actually don't have financial goals. They have ideas, but they don't have goals. They'll say, we want to save more money. Neat, but that's not a goal. It's just an idea. We'd like to have less debt. Neat, good idea, not a goal. In order for it to be a goal, there has to be a dollar amount associated with it, and there has to be a date associated with it. I would like to pay off $350 off of my Macy's credit card by November 8th, 2020. That's a goal. Because on November 8th, I've either paid off $350 off that balance or I have not. And if I have not, I'm forced to look at my spending over the last 30 days and say, okay, what was the problem? Why did we fail at this? This is the most important part of all of this. Because if you don't do that, then you give yourself these little excuses to spend too much on categories you know you're struggling with. I'm not saying this is you, but you might know someone who probably spends a little too much on dining out, right? You know what I mean? I've spent a little too much on dining out. And so what you'll do is you'll go, oh man, we spend too much on dining out. And you kind of laugh it off and it's a problem for months. And those months turn into years and those years turn into decades. And you just accept this fact that, oh, we spend a little too much on dining out. Meanwhile, none of these short-term financial goals are ever getting accomplished because you're never holding yourself accountable to a goal that doesn't exist. I highly recommend that you pick some meaningful, achievable goal in the next 30 days. Again, November 8th is the due date. Save a certain amount of money, you choose the amount. Pay off a certain amount of debt, you choose the amount. Start a college fund for your kids. Set an appointment to talk to Mike and Brandon, whatever. Another question just came in, so let's go ahead and hit it. Should you consolidate debt to make one payment? You know, I'm not a fan of that really. It's convenient, but I don't love it. It saves time, but it doesn't save money. And so the issue here for me is that oftentimes you can just get more organized and take care of business sooner. Sometimes consolidation makes sense, but I find that to be a rare case. Okay, I need you to go to annualcreditreport.com, not because I particularly care what your credit score is, or nor should you, because it is oftentimes misleading as to your actual financial health, but because there is going to be a tremendous amount of financial fraud on the rise. Why? Because people are hurting right now. And when people hurt, criminals come out of the woodwork to take advantage of them. And it's a sad reality, but it's true. So go to annualcreditreport.com and make sure you understand what debts you actually owe. And then go a year later and see to make sure that no one has opened a credit account in your name fraudulently. You should also freeze your credit. Most people, if not all people, should have frozen credit. It prevents anyone from using your information to open a new credit line. It does not hurt your credit. It does not prevent you from using your open credit lines. And there's really no harm in doing it. It's just a safer way to live. My credit is frozen. It's always frozen. If I needed to use my Social Security number to get approved for credit, I would temporarily unfreeze my credit, and then it will refreeze the day after whoever runs my credit. So I highly recommend you do that too. That will help as well. Let's do this. Let's bring the fellas back, Mike and Brandon, into the mix here. Guys, right now, as you look at people's biggest financial concerns, are you hearing a lot about market volatility in relation to what is going on in the election process, or does that not seem to bother people right now?
Absolutely. Market volatility during election years always, it seems like we see a lot more of these up and downs. And on top of COVID and all the other crazy stuff that we've had this year, volatility is that new norm. But again, from a risk standpoint, it's so important. look at where you are in your life stages. Are you getting closer to retirement? Maybe, again, take that volatility. And if you're having problems sleeping at night, that's where we've got to pull back the reins a little bit. Again, we're getting to those later innings, ninth inning. We don't have to hit that home run. Maybe we just have to get that base hit and keep that into consideration. For those of you that are maybe a little bit younger, volatility can be your friend. And again, the power of dollar cost averaging during these times are so valuable, especially for those of you that are in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s even. Again, we're buying, for example, into our 401ks. We get calls all the time where people say to us, hey, I don't know, the election's coming up. I just want to stop everything. Don't do that. That's gonna cause problems, chaos, fear, and you're gonna have missed opportunities. And so you've got to find ways to take advantage, but again, control level of find out what your risk tolerance, your comfort is, and we would help manage appropriately.
Now, Brandon, Mike makes a really good point there. Sometimes people get spooked by what's going on in the market, so they want to get out, which theoretically prefer you not do. But the bigger issue is this, Brandon: people don't know when to get back in, and it's that missed opportunity becomes the issue.
Absolutely. I mean, I always joke, I wish we had the crystal ball to be able to say, this is the time to get back in. None of us have that. Pete, you don't have that. It's one of those, to Mike's point, where you can just dollar cost average. And one of those things is like, you can't guess. We can make educated guesses. And for those, we had a lot of individuals when COVID came out early March and throughout late March, it's like, I want to pull all out. But for those that stuck through it, for those that had the stability, had some cash on the sidelines, I mean, they've been rewarded for having that capabilities to do so.
Brandon, there's also been an increase in the popularity of online trading during this pandemic. My theory on that is that people are so hurt by what's going on that they feel like they want to win. They want to get over and take advantage of a system that is currently hurting them. And oftentimes that inexperience and that speculation, which actually feels like gambling, comes back to hurt them. Why is working with a financial professional that's seen more than one of these events generally more prudent than a person trying to go alone with their own trading?
Absolutely. Again, there have been so many success stories over the last 6 months and a lot of failures. So what you're seeing on the internet, what you're seeing from your friends, it's like there have been so many opportunities over the time that, there are, when you see the earnings reports and some of these stocks that have done extremely well, you got to have that. What's that end goal of those? Are they long-term holds, or are we just trying to, have those ride up? Those are the conversations you do want to have with an advisor, or for somebody that you have a trusted relationship with. It's easy to get greedy in those situations where you have these big earners, but being able to make those transitions to maybe the next opportunity, or to be able to pull up some of those earnings off the table, is something that you want to definitely have that conversation with an advisor about, or somebody that might be a little bit more in line with what is either coming or looking at it from a different lens.
Mike, I'm curious your thoughts on the economy. Do you feel like we're heading for a K-shaped recovery where a portion of the economy is able to recover quickly, and another portion of the economy not only isn't able to recover quickly, but it's going to head the other direction because of maybe safety or trends in consumer purchases? Do you buy that? Or what's your feel in the next 6 to 12 months of what's ahead for us?
Absolutely. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the K recovery, again, just picture that shape of a K. Some businesses are doing obviously extremely well. In fact, those businesses are doing better now during these COVID times than maybe where they were a year ago. And so they've been able to take advantage. You're seeing other businesses, the bottom part of that K, that, again, have gone out. They've gone bankrupt. They didn't have the excess cash, and they've had to close their doors. You've had others that kind of went down and they're starting to recover all the way. And again, you have some that are going to be going all the way down. But again, from the economic standpoint, a couple examples of that K, anybody that's watching, for example, some of these NFL games or Major League Baseball, we don't have people in the stands right now, and maybe the beer sales aren't there, and it's this trickle down effect. Concerts are another example, airlines. And so it's going to take a little bit of time, but as we start seeing some of these things, these new vaccines come out, a lot of those areas are going to rebound. Even for example, Vegas, who would have thought Vegas would have closed down out of all places, right? And you're seeing some of these companies having to change their worlds. MGM, they're doing some of the online, gambling type stuff, and they're acquiring some of these businesses. So again, it's that time where, again, you've got to be strategic if you're going to go with the rifle approach, or again, if you're looking holistic, trying to get better diversification, whether it's sectors or other things. That's where a lot of these mutual funds, exchange traded funds, things of that nature, maybe give you a little bit broader shotgun approach to where if one of those positions falls down that bottom side of the K, you're not going to be beat up as bad maybe as if we've got greater diversification. We have other ones that are recovering and lifting up the rest of that portfolio.
In that respect, Mike, talk to me about target date funds. For those watching now, those are those funds within your retirement plan that often have a year associated with them, and that year is meant to ideally match up when you think you may begin taking income or to retire. Are target date funds a good solution for people who, don't want to mess with their stuff and maybe want an all-in-one solution? What are your thoughts on those?
Great point. And target date funds, again, for a lot of you on these calls, these are like the biggest buzzword when it comes to retirement plan, especially over the last 10, 15 years. 15 years ago, I don't even think many of these things were out there. But for a lot of you in your 401ks, they are a default investment. And it's really to protect you from yourselves. Years and years ago, people would select their investments. They were 25 years old. They worked for the same company for 40 years. And they never changed their investments. Nobody talked to them. And so they may have been in a super aggressive thing. And if the stock market plummets as they're getting close to retirement, they never made any changes to pull back the reins. And so they got beat up. And so these target date funds, even though it may say one fund with a year next to it, somebody says, well, I need to be diversified. It is essentially a fund of funds. And so it's going to be extremely diversified. It gets more conservative for those individuals. And for the vast majority of people, especially as they're getting started, it's a terrific investment option to kind of put you on the right track. Now, not all 50-year-olds are the exact same, right? And so some 50-year-olds are saying, hey, on that chart that Pete was talking about, where are we at? Are we, again, at the very top? Are we in, I guess, section number 1? Maybe we need to be a little bit more conservative. Or if we're stable, maybe we can afford to be more aggressive. And so you may get a little bit of one-offs, again, as you start amassing more and more wealth. But again, to my point, target date funds are terrific options. And again, we do believe in those.
Brandon, while that advice Mike just gave is correct and it makes sense, it can be confusing because you constantly hear, oh, I should be diversified, which means I need to see 5 or 6 different lines on my statement. So, Brandon, what people tend to do is they'll say, well, I really should have the 2045 fund, but I'm going to sprinkle a little 2030 fund and a little 2060 fund in there too. That's not how it works, right?
You're right on spot. It is counterproductive to what those target date funds are built to do. We have seen it, and it's actually very common in plans where you're not getting some assistance, where you might even see 2 or 3 different target date funds being used. And again, because of that, hey, I need to be more diversified.
When you're feeling scared, you'll take action, whether it's good or bad. And if you're getting ahead of your skis a little bit and you're feeling greedy, you might take a particular action. With that being said, if you subscribe to that particular theory, Do you think right now more people are making investment decisions based on fear or greed? So Brandon, where do you think they line up right now?
I would say the majority are fear. This day and age, I mean, we've kind of talked about on that throughout. It's, you know, the political uncertainty, the economic uncertainty. It's just been a complicated way to look at the markets and make that, what does 6 months look like from now? You know, not wanting to jump into politics, but what does tax code look like 6 months from now? And so again, it's reviewing that risk tolerance and understanding where are you comfortable with is something that you definitely want to be reviewing on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, Mike, I'm curious on your thoughts. I was hoping your whiteboard behind you would have like the secret to life written on it, including the answer to this question. Do you think more decisions are being made on fear or greed right now in the investment marketplace?
You know, it's in my own weird mind, you know, I as you stated that, I've got clients lighting up the board on both sides. And it's like, you know, some of these people, you know, again, they're opportunistic. They're saying, you know what, here's what I want to do. Maybe they've benefited by, again, making some timely investments in March. And so all of a sudden they saw some of these things run up. And again, at that point, it's almost like they feel like everything's just going to be that softball thrown to them that they're going to hit out of the park. It doesn't always work that way. And so you've got the other side that says, hey, the market's going to implode after the elections are done. And so they're trying to raise cash. But again, I think that goes back to Brandon's point. You've got to have that balance. You got to understand what the end game is. What are these investments for? Is it a college fund where your kid's going to college in 6 months? Go back the reins. I mean, there's no reason to have that excess risk. But on the flip side, if I've got 30 years until retirement, whatever happens in the next 6 months, it's not going to, it may be a bleep on your statement for a minute in the grand scheme of things, but you've got to keep the time horizon of the investment, you know, out at bay. And you've got to let the markets kind of do what they're going to do. You know, again, but understand again how you've got that allocated and what the intent of those funds are.
Well, I wanted to thank both you guys for having me here today. I also want to thank our friends over at Nuveen for making this possible, and of course our friends at One America. So Mike, I'm going to hand it over back to you. Again, thanks for letting me be part of this, and I wish you and your organization a good rest of the year, and to all of you who took time out of your day, thanks. So Mike, back to you, buddy.
Great. Hey, thank you so much. This has been terrific. I know even in my own role as a financial advisor, it's always good kind of getting the thoughts, opinions, and again, hopefully all of you on this call today felt like, again, Pete talked our language, right? I mean, it's not like this stuff way over our heads. Again, super thanks again to Nuveen and One America for helping to sponsor today's event. And I tell you what, again, some of the most important pieces I believe that we got out of today, we've got to come up with a plan. And in our world, we start with what is the 3-year goal, okay? And 3 years is important because it's just the year after next. And so in our minds, 3 years isn't, you know, again, it's not a 20-year plan, a 50-year plan. It's 3 years. It's measurable. It's a measurable time. But once we kind of come up with whatever that 3-year is, let's back it down to 1 year, 90. Confidence. So again, as you're starting to make some of those decisions today, again, are we buying that craft beer? Are we buying that Busch Light? Hopefully, it's not quite to that extent. But again, thank you again so much for joining us. We've enjoyed being your host, and again, happy planning.
Thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate your time.